Good morning, everyone. Don't count the cost. If you count the cost, then you're going to miss the magnificence. And the invitation there is don't count the cost. See, if we count the cost, then we miss the magnificence. Last week, we talked about, and we were looking at the scriptures, and they were talking about the covenant, in particular, how Jesus had re-elevated marriage to a sacrament, that it was, in fact, a covenant from the beginning. A covenant is different than a contract that's an exchange of services. A covenant is a total gift of self. And we put it this way, you want to answer the call of the covenant. What we're saying there is that when we're called to give of ourselves, and ultimately, so we're talking about, we all have our individual callings, our vocation, whether that is priesthood, consecrated life, single life, married life, whatever. But ultimately, it's God in Jesus Christ, the image of the living God, who gives himself to you and me. He is the bridegroom, and we are the bride. And he lays himself down for us. And our life is a total giving back to God. And so part of that giving are those sacrificial moments where, we have to, and that was last week, encouraging us to answer the call of the covenant. So I told you I was 3 a.m, and it's different. It's one thing to be able to answer the call for a last rites. I don't have any problem with that. No difficulty there. But picking up the phone, looking at it, seeing it was a priest, and thinking, so my other job is vicar for clergy, and I deal with all kinds of challenges and difficulties. Why is a priest calling me at 3 a.m? Well, the church was on fire, okay? And it burned to the ground. And so thank the Lord, I did answer the call. Okay, this was a priest that was from another country and that has come thousands and thousands of miles to serve the people of West Virginia, the people of God. And he wouldn't have known to, your first thing is to call the insurance agent, and then, the buildings and properties guy, and then this person and that person stuff. And so, I was so happy that I resisted the temptation. And we're all there. We've all been there. Where something is presented to you and you don't want to do it. But it's part of what you're supposed to do. And you fight the temptation of not doing it, and you go ahead and you just do it. And you're so happy that you did. Because it's a fulfillment of that covenant of a giving of ourselves. It's the challenge, it's the difficulty, and we have to answer the call of the covenant. And that's the invitation. Now, today, counting the cost, you can spend a lot of time. I'm called to do this, and I have to do this, and this, and this, and this, and I'm constantly telling everybody, that. Or, if you're doing that, you're missing the magnificence of what God is calling you to do. So in this particular instance, Peter is saying, Lord, we've given up everything. So it is important for us to kind of frame this. It's not like, 11 out of the 12 disciples were married. They didn't bring their wives or their families with them over those 3 years. Okay, they left them. And that's one of the things of apostolic continence. Okay, when they left their wives, they left everything. There was a moment where Peter came back, and we see that they came back to Peter's house, but it was just a blip, and then they're gone. They left everything. And that's what's coming up in the gospel today. Well, we've left everything. What's going to happen? See, and you can focus on that. You can focus on what you gave up. And you can lament that and keep going over and over again. We don't have this and we don't have that. And you're counting the cost of the gift of saying yes to something. And if you do that, if you constantly count the cost, you're going to miss the magnificence of what He's called you to. So I think of and John Saplinski, who is a seminarian. He's over at Sacred Heart. He was there this morning. I turned to him. I was like, "Well, we've given up a wife and children and a career." He was an accountant. I was moving towards anesthesia. Okay. Now I did turn to him and I say, "Well, you think you're giving up a wife? You're going to have 100 wives." And what I mean by that is you'll have 100 women telling you what to do. Okay, all right. Now I'm going to get it for that. I'm sorry. I'm just playing. So it goes both ways. The guys tell the girls what to do too. So, but there is something to that. Is that even in this life, you receive 100-fold. There is something to that. The grade school, the high school, let's see, 200, 300. I have 360 children in the grade school. And then, put the CCD on top of that, it's like 400. 400 young people that I have an opportunity to give to. Okay? That's a tremendous outpouring. And that's what it's saying. Is saying that when we make a sacrifice, how often I see my mother, my dear, dear mother, who I love. I love my mom, very close to her. I see her twice a year, 2 times. Thanksgiving and in July. Okay? And I don't feel bad during those 4 days when people say, "Father, can we see it?" No. It's Mom's time. That's all she gets. 4 days. 4 days in November and 7 days. And you know what? We know that. That's part of the sacrifice. I just married a couple on Friday down in Wheeling. The second so when I give a marriage homily, it's always about covenant, a total gift of self, 3 C's: communication, collaboration, and compromise. So compromise, not your wants or your beliefs or your values, but you compromise your wants and your likes. You do that in marriage. If you don't, it's going to be a long life. All right, so wants and likes, you have to, and you can't keep score. All right, communication, you got to communicate with God, with each other, and with your family and friends. Collaboration is the C where you have to realize we're together and we're first. Our relationship is first, and then the rest of the family comes second. That's always a hard part for the family to hear. He's my son. That's my daughter. It's like, well, okay. If it's going to work, they're first, then the family second. There's sacrifice. Okay. You have to give up something, and it costs. But you can't count that cost, because if you count that cost, then you miss the magnificence. I always think of my maternal grandmother, Frances, Nanny to me. So Frances Schroed, she became Frances Stipe. She married my grandfather. He converted to Catholicism. And Nanny was straightforward. And, somebody dies, and we're kind of crying and stuff. She's like, what you crying for? Oh, they're in a better place. That's ridiculous. And we're like, man, it's, somebody died. It's ridiculous. And she was just this, she didn't focus on the cost. She wanted you to focus on the magnificence. Now, to put it into context, my grandmother grew up in the Depression, like in the throes of the Depression. So she knew what it was like to have nothing. She also got hit in the eye by a little boy who threw a rock, and she lost her eye as a little girl. And she didn't cry, she didn't whine, or she just grew up tough and focused not on the cost, but on the good, the magnificent. She died at 79, and she died, unfortunately. It was a blotched heart catheterization, unfortunately. But she did stroke after that, but she was still with it. And I visited her while I was in seminary. It was 3 years into seminary, and she looked at me. There's nobody else around. And again, this is somebody that always counts, doesn't count the cost, but looks at the magnificence. She said, Duke, you don't have to be a priest. Everybody else is just like, they're all this encouragement, yeah, I think you would be a great priest, and all this kind of stuff. She said, you don't need to do that if it's not in your heart. You do what is in your heart. From somebody that doesn't count the cost, but always looks to the magnificent. Oh, that was her last gift to me. And then she died. What are you called to? Guaranteed, there's going to be sacrifice. There's going to be real difficulties, challenges. And you're like, oh. And it's okay. It's okay to admit that. This is so hard. These are challenges. I don't like this. That's okay. I'm not saying that you got to put on some smiley face and pretend. But on the same lines, we have to realize that if we're going to live and to love greatly, then there will be real costs to our call. Don't count them. Focus on the magnificence of what God is placing before us.